2:47 p.m. The Red Sea, 119 miles northwest of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The afternoon sun pressing hard on the water from the southwest, the sea running a moderate chop from the northwest wind, visibility clear in every direction. The horizon, a clean, sharp line between the deep blue of the Red Sea and the pale white sky of a hot afternoon. Commercial shipping lanes busy in both directions, container vessels, bulk carriers, tankers. The lifeblood of global trade moving through one of the world's most critical maritime choke points in both directions, their crews unaware of what was unfolding 40 miles to their south. USS Carney, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, DDG-64, 455 feet of steel, 80,000 shaft horsepower, a crew of 281, and the most sophisticated naval air defense system ever installed on a surface combatant anywhere in the world. The AN/SPY-1D phased array radar, 96 VLS cells loaded with a combination of SM-2, Block 3B, and SM-6 Standard missiles, evolved Sea Sparrow missiles for inner layer defense, and a Phalanx CIWS as last resort point defense. She was transiting northbound through the Red Sea on a freedom of navigation operation, her systems at the elevated readiness condition that had been standard for American surface combatants in this waterway since the Houthi campaign against commercial shipping had begun 18 months earlier. 208 miles to the southeast, in the Gulf of Aden, USS Mason, DDG-87, was conducting a separate transit northbound toward the Bab el-Mandeb, on a track that would bring her to the strait in approximately 4 hours. Same class, same systems, same elevated readiness posture. Her crew was experienced. She had previously deployed to this theater, and her commanding officer had supervised 2 active missile defense engagements against Houthi anti-ship missiles in the preceding 18 months. At 2:47 p.m., both ships were struck simultaneously. Not by Houthi weapons, not by the improvised anti-ship missiles that had characterized the preceding 18 months of campaign activity in this waterway, but by a coordinated multi-axis attack that had been planned and resourced at a level of sophistication that the Houthi movement had never independently demonstrated and could not independently sustain. The opening salvo against USS Carney, 12 Quds, 1 land attack cruise missiles, Iranian-designed and Iranian-supplied, launched from 4 separate mobile launchers in the Al-Hudaydah coastal district of northwestern Yemen, flying a sea-skimming profile at 15 meters altitude on a direct northwestern bearing toward the ship's computed position. Simultaneously, 6 Iranian-supplied Sachid-3 surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, a medium-range ballistic variant specifically modified for maritime strike, launched from the Sada Highlands on a trajectory that would bring them to their target zone in approximately 4 minutes and 30 seconds, designed to arrive overhead while USS Carney's defensive systems were engaged with the crew's missile threat at the horizon. The opening salvo against USS Mason, 208 miles to the southeast. 9 Quds-1 cruise missiles from launchers in the Lahij district of southern Yemen, plus 4 additional Sayyad-3 ballistic missiles from the Damar Highlands on a separate firing bearing. Both attacks timed to simultaneous impact, the cruise missiles flying their sea-skimming approach, the ballistic missiles arriving from above, both ships forced to fight in 2 threat dimensions at once while separated by 200 miles and unable to provide mutual defensive fire support. Total weapons in the opening salvo, 31, against 2 ships, a 31-to-2 ratio, simultaneously, in 2 different bodies of water. In Tehran, the operation had been approved at the highest level of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps 6 weeks earlier and had been in active preparation since that authorization. The strategic design was elegant in its calculation. The Houthi campaign against commercial shipping had been producing diminishing strategic returns. The commercial shipping community had adapted, rerouted, or accepted risk, and the political leverage of the campaign was declining. What was required was a demonstration of a different order of magnitude. not harassment of commercial vessels. The direct engagement of American naval combatants, two simultaneously, separated by distance, in a coordinated multi-domain salvo that would demonstrate Iranian Houthi operational reach and sophistication in a single, globally visible event. The IRGC's targeting analysts had assessed the two-ship split as creating an engagement geometry that would stress the American defensive response. Two destroyers 200 miles apart could not support each other with missiles. Each would have to fight alone. The combined salvo of 31 weapons was calculated to produce at minimum one successful impact per ship, enough to generate the imagery of damaged American warships in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden that would transform the strategic picture. They had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: the mobile launchers in Al-Hudaydah and Lahij and the ballistic missile positions in Sada and Damar had not been chosen and positioned unobserved. The combination of NRO satellite imagery, NSA collection against IRGC logistics communications, and a network of human intelligence assets that had been providing the CIA with reporting on IRGC weapons transfers to Yemen for 22 months, had produced a threat picture of high confidence for a coordinated multi-axis attack on American naval vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden 9 days before the attack occurred. The specific launcher positions had been identified 4 days before the attack. The specific weapons types, Quds-1 and Sayad-3, had been confirmed through SIGINT intercepts of the IRGC logistics network that had delivered them. The attack was not a surprise to anyone in the American command structure. It was an anticipated event for which a comprehensive response had been pre-positioned and pre-authorized. The second mistake: the two-ship split geometry that the IRGC had assessed as creating unsupportable defensive stress was accurate for a pre-2023 naval architecture. It did not account for the guided missile cruiser USS Chancellorsville, CG-62, operating in MCON posture at a position 47 miles north of USS Carney, that had been placed there specifically because the high-confidence threat assessment had identified USS Carney as one of the probable targets. USS Chancellorsville's AN/SPY-1B radar and her 98 VLS cells, loaded with SM-2, SM-6, and SM-3 Block 2A interceptors, had been in passive tracking mode, receiving feeds from USS Carney's radar picture via the Cooperative Engagement Capability link for the previous 11 hours. The IRGC's targeting picture showed 2 isolated destroyers. The actual defensive architecture had 3 ships networked into a single shared air picture with automated engagement deconfliction across all 3 AN/SPY systems simultaneously. The third mistake: the Sayad-3 ballistic missiles were designed to arrive overhead while USS Carney's systems were occupied with the cruise missile threat at the horizon, exploiting the simultaneous engagement stress that single-ship defense against a multi-axis salvo creates. The SM-3 Block 2 EC interceptor carried by USS Chancellorsville was not designed for cruise missile defense. It was designed for exactly the ballistic missile intercept mission: upper-tier engagement of medium-range ballistic missiles in their exo-atmospheric phase, at ranges and altitudes where the Sayad-3's trajectory was most vulnerable, and where a kinetic intercept produced no debris risk to the ship. The 6 Sayad-3s heading for USS Carney had been assigned to the SM-3 engagement tier by the Cooperative Engagement Capability System's automated engagement management function before the missiles had completed their first 30 seconds of flight. USS Carney's SM-2 and SM-6 cells were freed entirely for the cruise missile horizon threat. The fourth mistake: the Gulf of Aden attack against USS Mason had been planned with the assumption that Mason would be fighting alone, 200 miles from any support. It had not accounted for the fact that the carrier strike group centered on USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, operating in the northern Arabian Sea 230 miles southeast of the Gulf of Aden, had been repositioned 48 hours earlier following the threat assessment. 4 FA-18 Super Hornets from USS Eisenhower had been on airborne alert, orbiting in a holding pattern 60 miles southeast of USS Mason since 1 p.m. that afternoon, waiting for exactly the launch signature that appeared on their targeting systems at 2:47 p.m. They were not rescue or reinforcement. They were armed with AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles and JDAM strike weapons pre-targeted against the Lahij and Damar launcher positions. They were airborne combat power in range, with preloaded strike solutions, waiting for a launch event that would authorize their pre-planned strike package. The fifth mistake. The 31-weapon combined salvo had been timed for simultaneous arrival at both targets, a coordination feat that required precise timing discipline across 6 separate launch groups in 2 countries. That timing discipline required a coordination signal, a final fire authorization broadcast that synchronized the 6 launch groups to within a 90-second window. That signal had been intercepted and decoded by NSA collection assets 9 minutes before it was transmitted. The intercept was transmitted to both ship commanding officers and to Pacific Command at 2:38 p.m., 9 minutes before the first missile lifted off. 9 additional minutes of warning time on top of the elevated readiness posture that had been in place for 9 days. The SM-2, SM-6, and SM-3 engagement solutions were already computed. The engagement sequences were already assigned through the CEC network. The fire control systems were waiting for radar confirmation of tracks that the commanding officers already knew were coming. The 6th mistake, the one that made the salvo not a demonstration of Iranian Houthi reach, but a targeting list for the most comprehensive single-day strike on Houthi military infrastructure ever executed, was a fundamental miscalculation about consequences. The IRGC had designed the attack as a signal, a demonstration that the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden were contested spaces where American naval presence carried costs. They had not designed it as a prelude to the elimination of their entire Yemeni weapons and launch infrastructure. The pre-authorized response package, approved by the National Command Authority 6 days after the high confidence assessment, defined the attack on American naval vessels as triggering not a proportional tit-for-tat strike against the specific launchers that fired, but a comprehensive counterforce operation against the entire IRGC-Houthi weapons infrastructure in Yemen. Every identified launcher position, every confirmed weapons storage facility, every command and control node, every logistics hub through which Iranian weapons had moved into Yemen, in a single coordinated strike, executed simultaneously with the defensive engagement. What happened in the next 73 minutes removed the IRGC-Houthi anti-ship strike capability from the operational equation for the foreseeable future. At 2:47 p.m., the launch signatures of the 12 Quds-1 cruise missiles appeared on USS Carney's AN/SPY-1D radar at ranges between 61 and 78 miles. Sea-skimming profiles, low radar cross-section, flying toward the ship from 4 vectors. Simultaneously, the 6 Sayyad-3 ballistic missile boost phases appeared on the space-based infrared system and were queued to USS Chancellorsville's SM-3 engagement system within 3 seconds of launch detection. The CEC network assigned engagements automatically. USS Chancellorsville's SM-3 Block 2, the interceptors, handled the Sayyad-3 ballistic tier. The first SM-3 launched at 2:48 a.m. and 12 seconds. Over the next 3 minutes and 41 seconds, 6 SM-3 interceptors were fired against 6 Sayyad-3 ballistic missiles in the exo-atmospheric intercept zone above the Red Sea. All 6 intercepts were assessed as successful. All 6 Sayyad-3s were removed from the battle space above 60 kilometers altitude before any had completed their terminal phase descent toward USS Carney. USS Carney's own VLS cells, freed from ballistic missile engagement by the CEC deconfliction, engaged the 12 incoming Quds-1 cruise missiles with SM-2 Block 3B interceptors, 2 per target, in continuous fire that began at ranges of 54 miles and continued through the engagement timeline. The SM-2 salvo was supplemented by SM-6 engagements for the 3 cruise missiles, whose sea-skimming profiles placed them at the outer edge of SM-2 engagement envelopes given sea state geometry. Of 12 Quds, 1 cruise missiles, 9 intercepted by SM-2, 3 intercepted by SM-6, 0 penetrating to evolved Sea Sparrow range, 0 reaching phalanx. USS Carney sustained 0 impacts, 0 damage. The engagement had consumed 21 SM-2 and 3 SM-6 interceptors from her VLS cells. In the Gulf of Aden, USS Mason's defensive engagement was simultaneous and equally complete. The 4 Sayyad-3 ballistic missiles were engaged by SM-3 interceptors that USS Chancellorsville's CEC link had reserved 2 cells for even at her distance of 260 miles. The SM-3 Block 2A's maximum engagement range, covering the Gulf of Aden geometry, at the outer edge of its performance envelope. 3 of 4 Sayyad-3s were intercepted by SM-3 in the upper tier. 1 Sayyad-3 survived the SM-3 engagement and descended toward USS Mason, where her own SM-6 interceptors, assigned to the ballistic residual track by the CEC system, achieved an intercept in the terminal phase at 31 kilometers altitude. 0 Sayyad-3S reached USS Mason. The 9 Quds 1 cruise missiles were engaged by USS Mason's SM-2 cells in the sequence the CEC system had pre-assigned, 8 intercepted by SM-2, 1 by ESSM. 0 cruise missiles reached phalanx range. At 2:53 p.m., 6 minutes after the first missile launched, both ships transmitted weapons free, all threats neutralized to 5th Fleet and to USS Eisenhower's strike group. The pre-authorized response package executed at 2:54 p.m. The 4 FA-18 Super Hornets holding southeast of USS Mason had been waiting for exactly this transmission. They turned northwest at 2:54 p.m. and were over the Lahij district launch positions at 3:11 p.m. The 9 Quds 1 cruise missile mobile launchers in Lahij, 4 that had fired, 5 that had been held in reserve and were still in their deployment positions, were struck by AGM-84 Harpoons and GBU-38 JDAMs. The 4 fired launchers were struck to eliminate their reload capability. The 5 reserve launchers were struck to eliminate the unfired weapons. All 9 launcher systems confirmed destroyed by battle damage assessment. The IRGC logistics compound outside Al-Hudaydah, through which the Quds 1 missiles had been transported, was struck by 8 GBU-31 JDAMs from 2 additional FA-18Es that had launched from USS Eisenhower at 2:55 p.m. Structural collapse confirmed. Secondary detonations indicating stored propellant or warhead material. From USS Eisenhower, 6 additional FA-18E Super Hornets launched at 2:55 p.m. carrying Slammer standoff missiles assigned to the Sada and Damar ballistic missile firing positions in the Yemeni highlands, the positions from which the 10 Sayyad-3 missiles had launched. The Sada position had 2 remaining Sayyad-3 launchers that had not fired in the initial salvo, assessed as reload vehicles. Both were struck by Slammers at 3:19 p.m. The Damar firing position had been partially vacated. 2 of the 4 launchers had begun road movement immediately after firing, but 2 remained in place and were struck. The 2 displaced launchers were acquired by an MQ-9 Reaper that had been on continuous orbit over the Damar Highlands since noon and were struck by AGM-114 Hellfire missiles at 3:31 p.m. as they attempted to reach their hardened revetment positions. From Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, 8 F-35s launched at 2:58 p.m. carrying JASSM-ER cruise missiles on pre-planned strike profiles against the 5 IRGC logistics and command infrastructure targets that the intelligence picture had identified as the Iranian backbone of the Houthi anti-ship campaign. The IRGC Weapons Transfer Coordination Center at Sana'a International Airport's military terminal, the node through which weapon shipments were documented and distributed to Houthi operational forces, received 6 JASSM-ERs at 3:24 p.m. Structural collapse of the coordination facility confirmed. The IRGC Aerospace Force Technical Advisory Compound, adjacent to the Sana'a military terminal, housing the Iranian technical personnel who had provided guidance, targeting data, and operational planning support for the anti-ship campaign, received 4 JASSMERs. The facility was rendered inoperable. The primary IRGC weapons storage facility in the Al-Baida district, assessed as containing an inventory of additional Quds-1 airframes and Sayed-3 components, received 8 JASSMERs in a strike pattern targeting the hardened storage bunkers and the adjacent propellant mixing and assembly facility. Secondary detonations from the stored propellant were assessed as catastrophic to the stored inventory. From the Red Sea, USS Chancellorsville launched 32 Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles at 3:02 p.m. Their targets were the 11 confirmed Houthi command and control facilities across northern and western Yemen that had provided the targeting data, communications relay, and launch coordination for the attack. Nodes that the intelligence picture had mapped over the preceding 22 months of the anti-ship campaign. The Tomahawks struck their targets between 3:31 p.m. and 3:44 p.m. in a sequenced multi-target time-on-target package. All 11 facilities received direct impacts. Post-strike reconnaissance assessed 10 of 11 as structurally collapsed. One facility had been partially evacuated before impact. Its communications infrastructure and operations room received direct strikes while the accommodation section sustained partial damage. By 4 p.m., 73 minutes after the first Quds-1 missile launched from the Al-Hudaida coast, the complete response package was executed. The final accounting documented by 5th Fleet and CENTCOM over the subsequent 72 hours was definitive. Incoming weapons engaged, 31 total, 19 Quds-1 cruise missiles, 10 Sayad-3 ballistic missiles, 2 reserve systems targeted in post-attack strikes. All 31 neutralized before reaching either target vessel. USS Carney, 0 impacts, 0 damage, all systems fully operational. USS Mason, 0 impacts, 0 damage, fully operational. American personnel on both vessels having sustained any injury, 0. IRGC-Houthi launch infrastructure neutralized. All 9 Lahij cruise missile launchers, all 4 Sada ballistic missile launchers including 2 that attempted road movement, all 4 Damar launchers. Reserve launcher vehicles at both sites, neutralized. Total launcher systems rendered inoperable, 21. IRGC Coordination Center at Sana'a rendered inoperable. IRGC Technical Advisory Compound rendered inoperable. Al-Baida Weapons Storage Facility structurally collapsed with total assessed loss of stored inventory. Houthi Command and Control Facilities struck by Tomahawk. 10 confirmed structural collapse. Total IRGC-Houthi facilities and assets rendered inoperable in the response package, 34. American aircraft lost, 0. All FA-18S recovered aboard USS Eisenhower by 6:30 p.m. All F-35s returned to Al-Udeid, USS Chancellorsville, USS Carney, and USS Mason. All undamaged, fully operational, continuing their transits by 5 p.m. American service members having sustained any injury, 0. In Tehran, the IRGC commander received his damage assessment between 4 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. The attack, designed to produce images of damaged American warships, had produced images of 34 destroyed or inoperable IRGC-Houthi facilities across Yemen. The 31 weapons selected to overwhelm 2 isolated destroyers had been engaged, sequenced, deconflicted, and neutralized by a networked architecture whose true capability the IRGC had not assessed in any dimension, not in ship count, not in interceptor variety, not in CEC integration, and not in the 9 minutes of warning time that signals intelligence had provided before the first missile flew. Commercial shipping in the Red Sea resumed normal routing within 72 hours. The Bab el-Mandeb was open. USS Carney completed her transit on schedule. This is what happens when you plan the most sophisticated anti-ship operation your network has ever attempted against 2 isolated destroyers and discover that a 3rd ship was already in the net. Your weapons were pre-assigned to engagement tiers before they left their launchers, and your coordination signal was intercepted 9 minutes before you transmitted it. The Red Sea is open. The ships are sailing. They always will be.